Hello, everyone. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Um, Thank you for coming to another webinar organized by the IATEFL ReSIG. Today, we're very honored to be hosting Annamaria Pinter, who will be talking about children working as co-researchers and researchers and the possibilities and challenges involved in that. Dr. Pinter is an associate professor at the Center for Applied Linguistics at the University of Warwick. She's the author of Teaching Young Language Learners and also the author of Children Learning Second Languages. She is an expert in the field of teaching English to young learners, and I'm sure that we're going to benefit from this particular webinar, as we've done with other webinars we've organized in the past few months. And we're really pleased to have Annamaria with us here today, and I'm sure that we're in for a treat. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you very much, Daniel, for the kind introduction. I can see that there are a few familiar faces in the room. I'm really pleased that you logged in on a Saturday afternoon. I apologize if some of the content might be familiar to some of you, because I have actually talked about this quite a bit before and have written about this quite a bit before. And I did a webinar in Graz in the summer, and that's where Sarah Mercer asked me to do something similar for this ReSIG. So of course I said yes, and I'm not doing the same thing as I did in Graz, but some of the basic principles and ideas will be, I think, familiar to some of you. So thank you again for joining us for Saturday afternoon and giving up on shopping and all the other fun stuff you could be doing. So I'm talking about children working as co-researchers and researchers, and in particular, I'll be talking about two recent projects that I have been involved with. This picture here on the first slide is from India. And this is where one of the projects took place, and I will have lots of examples from India. The other project is from the UK, and it's a much smaller project in a local school near my university. So let me start by just saying a little bit more about myself, in case some people don't know me. As Daniel said, I have been working now for nearly 20 years at the University of Warwick, and my main job here is to work on the master's course, which is for English language teachers. So I have the privilege of meeting lots and lots of teachers from all over the world, and it is a really enjoyable job, and that is kind of what I do most of the time. These two books here on this slide, some of you might know them. The first one is actually the one with the green cover, called Teaching Young Language Learners, is actually a second edition of a book that I wrote in 2006, so more than 10 years ago. And it's really very satisfying to me to see that the original book did so well, and lots of teachers, lots and lots of colleges have used it over the years. So I'm really happy that the second edition has come out, because it has got lots and lots of new ideas, new materials, new research in it. And in fact, it even has a little bit of what I'm talking about today included in this new edition. Underneath, you can see there is an address, a website address, and that's where quite a lot of free material is available in relation to the book. So materials for regarding the content of individual chapters, discussion tasks, and all kinds of ideas, such as websites that people might be interested in if they work with young learners, young language learners. The second book is more for MA students, has got a little bit more research in it, but I just put it up there in case some of you might like to have a look at it. So I worked with young learners at every level, if you like. I used to teach in a primary school. I also taught primary school teachers. And I work now with people who would like to do research in this area. So I think it's a real privilege to be able to do all three or all these different things, because I'm a firm believer that whatever you're researching needs to work on the ground and needs to make sense on the ground in classrooms, and the other way around. Anything that is interesting and happening in classrooms is of course worthy of research, and it's important that researchers tap into those things that are important to classrooms and classroom teachers. So before I start talking about why and how I got into working with children as co-researchers, I would just like to reflect back for going back several years before I got interested in this whole idea, because I remember that even at the beginning of my career, when I wasn't really looking at children as co-researchers, I always noticed that children had interesting opinions, and if you asked them, if you looked for their feedback, they were very ready to give it. And I also noticed many years ago that they enjoyed making choices, and they always committed to these choices. So whenever in class I said, okay, so I have got 3 envelopes and you can choose which animal you want to read about, there was always this kind of extra excitement. Of course, all the reading texts were very similar, but still the idea that they could make a choice was very important to them. They, of course, can initiate new ideas and interesting insights, and they can also take control of some of their learning tasks. And if you sort of allow them to make their choices and allow them to take some control of their learning tasks, it's very noticeable that they get more motivated and develop a sense of pride. This is what I've chosen, this is what I managed to do, this is the end product, and I'm very proud of it. So that would be a very kind of typical outcome. So I always felt that children perhaps should be given a little more freedom, should be given a little more control over what happens in classrooms. So many years ago, I used to go along to the other IATEFL SIG called learner autonomy and learner independence. And I began to think about why and how it might be possible to develop children's autonomy as language learners. And of course, this work that I'm doing now with children as co-researchers very much fits with this basic principle. So just to have a little more time on a basic concept, which is research, I wanted to just spend a little more time thinking about this. Because a lot of us use the word research routinely. We use it in the academic world all the time. We use it with our MA students all the time, but also children use it. If you ask a child, do you do research at school? They will say, of course we do. We look up things on Google. So this is a word that means different things to different people. But I think most people, perhaps who are a little further away from it, think of it as serious work that needs to happen in a library. And it's the kind of work that involves a lot of thick books, and not everyone can do it. So there is this kind of understanding that research is perhaps unattainable to some. Now, I'd like to suggest that we could look at research more as a continuum. So we could look at research with a small r, and we could kind of develop and look at research with a capital R. And look at what happens between the two. So how do you start out with a small r, and how do you reach the point where you might be doing research with a capital R? So of course, research means exploring things and finding answers. So even like I said before, a child in a primary school will tell you, of course, we look up things in Google, and in the big scheme of things, this is about finding answers. This is about exploring something we don't know, and it is at some level research. Now, if we take this a little bit further, you can also think about research where we explore things more systematically. So this is more than just a Google search. This is finding an interesting question and then looking at how you might find the answer over time, doing things perhaps much more deliberately to arrive at your answer. So there is, of course, academic research, and not everyone's interested in that. And that's kind of up there. And even when you're doing research in the academic world, you never quite reach a point when you're done, when you know everything, when you've done the perfect piece, because there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a perfect academic piece of research. There's always possibility to improve. There's also teacher research, and I know that this has been a big theme in the IATEFL ReSIG. My colleague, whose office is right here next door, Richard Smith, has been doing a lot of work in this area. And without going into exactly what it is, just suffice to say at this point that it may not be the same as academic research. Of course, some teachers may take it further and further and further and end up doing academic research as well. But we understand that classroom research, teacher research is something more pragmatic, more practical. It will be doing something that directly benefits the classroom. And different types of action research might be possible where teachers work on their own or together with their colleagues. And also exploratory practice as a concept has been promoted now for quite a long time, where we don't even need cycles of action and reflection. We just need to explore the current situation and try to make it better. So this kind of research is also out there, and it's also extremely important. And in fact, for teachers, this is much more important than academic research. A lot of teachers, if you ask them, they're not interested in reading journal article after journal article endlessly about academic research that they say may not be all that relevant to them. And then I would like to argue that there's also research that children will do. So this is research directly undertaken by children themselves. And I guess I need to say that perhaps this is certainly at the beginning must be research with just a small r. It can't, of course, I'm not suggesting it is the same as sophisticated academic research, but I would like to suggest that it is the starting point. It begins with rudimentary understanding of what social research might be, and it can take children quite away from those perhaps naive understandings at the beginning towards a much more sophisticated understanding. So in terms of how we can see research that's out there that involves children, I'd like to just very briefly show this slide. And I think the prepositions in red, if you don't remember ever anything other than the prepositions, you will remember the gist of what the slide is about. So I think it's important to just think about how much research is being done in each category. So the first kind of category is research on children. So this is, of course, the most traditional one, the most popular one. And of course, 90% of the research that goes on out there, which involves children, is like that. So children are generally passive and they are unknowing objects. The research often involves large numbers, and researchers are often interested in trends and averages. So things like, what does an average 5-year-old do in certain situations? Or what do primary school learners achieve in English by the end of their primary curriculum? So everything in this kind of research, of course, is adult motivated, which is not a great surprise. This is the norm. Of course, we as adults are very interested in children, their development, and we do this kind of research on them. But the main idea to remember that it's on them and they sort of kind of suffer it as unknowing objects. They might not even know what goes on, or if they know, they might have very partial understanding about it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this kind of research, of course not. Without this body of research, our current understanding of how children develop and learn languages would be non-existent. I'm not saying, of course, that this is problematic. I'm just saying 90% of the research out there is like this. The second category is research about children. So this is where there's much more interest in individual learners. Researchers actually recognize that in addition to trying to understand about trends and averages, it's important to understand individuals because kids are so unique and so different. So there is a very important attempt here to study the individuals, and some of the studies do this extremely well. If they want to understand, for example, children's literacy development, they might regularly talk to them. They might also observe them. They might talk to their parents. They might talk to their teachers. They might even observe them outside the school, what they do with their literacy practices outside the school. So you can make an effort to understand these children because you're using so many different kinds of data and so many kinds of different approaches to trying to understand the children in this kind of approach. But I think no matter how many different ways and how many different data sources we use, we're still very much trying to understand them from an adult perspective. So all our thinking and reasoning about how to observe them, how to talk to them, should we talk to the parents, all that comes from our very own understanding and knowledge about children and childhood. So the bottom of the slide has got two other categories, and this is where the perspective shift comes in. So research with children simply means that we begin to think of children as important partners in research. So rather than us adults deciding everything, we can think, how can we involve them? Maybe we can involve them throughout the project, maybe at the beginning, maybe for certain purposes. But the perspective shift is there because all the time the adult researcher will think, how can they contribute to this research project in a meaningful way? And if they contribute in a small way, maybe next time they'll be interested in contributing a little bit more. So the idea is that this can't happen, of course, overnight, and it can't happen everywhere. But if there is an intention to work with children in this way, then there might be various possibilities to involve them. And I'll show you lots of examples for this in a moment. And the final final box in this grid is research conducted entirely by children. And this is perhaps quite a revolutionary idea in many contexts, but this is actually not very new. In quite a lot of different fields, for example, in anthropology and sociology, for quite a while now, there has been a strong interest in promoting child research. And I have come across lots of interesting papers and books and chapters in books about this topic. And I'm not saying again that this is possible in every context, in every classroom, but it is something I think that we can look and aspire to. So for example, here I've got a slide that showcases the Open University Children's Research Center. So at this university, there's a whole department devoted to promoting children's research. And if you go to this website, then you will actually find examples of children's research, children presenting their own research. As you can see, these two kids here are presenting their research and it's been recorded and it's available for people to see on the website. There are some people here who work in an academic team and research into the phenomenon of child research. And then there are also people who go out to schools and communities and promote child-led research in various ways. So this is not, I just wanted to show you this because it's not something that is entirely new or entirely, absent. It's just that it hasn't been in our field promoted. So I've got one more slide here about the research continuum, and I would like to argue that whoever does research, whatever level, will always be kind of moving forward on a continuum. Because when you are involved in a research project and you complete a research project, you will learn lots of things. And when you do your next one, you will never be the same person. You will have all that experience behind you. So I would like to conceptualize it as an arrow, kind of moving forward on the continuum all the time. So learners, I put learners in the yellow arrow here. They're obviously going to be moving forward from little or no understanding of research whatsoever to ever more advanced or ever more sophisticated understanding. But they start sort of further down. They don't start at the same point as the adult facilitators. Obviously, they start a little bit further behind. So the teachers they're working with, or the adult facilitators who might not be the teachers, might be other adults, as they work on the project, they're also moving forward. They might be moving from informal ways of exploring the classroom to more academic ways. And I put a question mark here, but this has been my experience. For example, in India, the project I'm going to tell you about it in a minute, we worked with teachers who worked on exploring their own classrooms with their learners as co-researchers, and two of the teachers out of that cohort now have taken an interest in doing further studies in research. So one of them is now doing a PhD and the other one is doing a master's course. So for some reason, what happened to these teachers was that the informal way of exploring their classrooms and participating in a project simply motivated them to take it further. So those teachers are moving way faster than some others, but I think everyone is moving in the same direction. And I think if teachers go further and do research with children as co-researchers, there will be an overlap, of course, and their collaboration will allow them to move forward together. I'm not very good with these arrows, but I try to show that the togetherness is important, because that will also kind of help people to move forward in a different way to those who might just be adult researchers working on their own. So this is my kind of conceptual background, if you like. And I have seen this work with children in this way, that first the teacher introduces the idea of classroom research in partnership, and some learners will take interest in that, and some learners will begin to contribute and become aware of the opportunity to work together and do some kind of classroom research. And then over time, those who have taken an interest will need to spend time working alongside adults, taking various responsibilities in the research project. And then only then, some of them may or may not become fully fledged researchers themselves. So the idea is that we're not trying to make every single child a fully fledged researcher. The idea is that we are trying to gently nudge people forward on this continuum. And if they're interested, if they want to do some kind of research, then they should get the opportunity, and then little by little, they can take more and more responsibility. So in the kind of studies that I've seen and I have done, learners have been involved in various different ways. For example, they can be involved in asking questions. Sometimes adults ask certain questions that children don't like, or they've got a different perspective, or they suddenly come up with an insight that the adult wouldn't have thought about. So they can help us with new, novel research questions. I've also seen children design data collection tools for others. So for example, one of my graduate students wanted to design a questionnaire for her research participants who were 12-year-old children. And rather than designing it all by herself, she actually asked the help of other 12-year-olds. And it was very motivating for the group of children that she did the research with, because she was able to say to them, this questionnaire was actually designed by myself, but with the help of a group of children just like you. So that sounds a lot more motivating and a lot more interesting and a lot more meaningful to children in some situations, of course, not necessarily everywhere. Children are also very good at interviewing each other. So lots and lots of studies I've seen where children go out and interview each other, maybe in a parallel class, or maybe somebody a year younger in a particular school. Children are more willing to open up, for example, when they're being interviewed by another child. Of course, the topic is important. So if it's some sort of a sensitive topic, that might not be a good idea. But if the topic is something about vocabulary learning, or doing well at school, or ideas about, how to create an ideal lesson, these would be perfectly good opportunities for children to interview each other. Children can also analyze the data that we've got, although sometimes people say that this is where they begin to lose interest. I'll show you a project where the opposite happened. In fact, the data itself began to really hit it home what the research was all about. So it could be interesting for some children to get involved in data analysis. Now, writing the report is, again, a difficult part. Usually the adults end up writing the report, but I have seen even academic papers where the children's report was incorporated into the final academic report. And then disseminating findings, again, you can think of very innovative way in which the findings could be disseminated. This is where children actually get excited because other schools, other children, parents will learn and understand about their research. A real possibility is, of course, build it up bit by bit. So if you've got a project where some learners are only involved at the beginning, if they enjoyed it, maybe next time they can be involved a little more. And over time, if they're interested, they can carry on and in the new project take bigger roles. So enough about the background. So let me just tell you very briefly and show you some materials from the Indian project. So this is a picture of some of the teachers here at one of the conferences. So what happened was, this was a British Council project, and it was an ELT research partnership project between my university, University of Warwick, and University of Delhi. And my partner, University of Delhi, some of you, I'm sure, will know her. She's in the picture here, Professor Rama Matthew, who was a very inspirational colleague to me. And there was a group of 25 teachers participating, and more than 800 children, because all the teachers were teaching in more than one class. And the 25 teachers were from all over India, so it was extremely interesting. 5 of them started with us a little bit earlier, and they became mentors then to the 20 teachers who joined a little later. So mentoring in this case just meant that they knew a little bit more about the whole project and the whole idea than the new people. So the main thing we did was we got together, all of us, 25 teachers and Rama and myself, and we had a series of workshops where we explored the idea of how to work with children as co-researchers, with people, some people who never thought about this idea before, but they were all open and happy to try various ideas, and they were all obviously very keen volunteers. And we also had a Facebook group community to exchange materials and ideas and questions that came up. This is the project report, and I'm including this in case some of you might take an interest and want to read this. It's called Children and Teachers as Co-Researchers in Indian Primary Classrooms, and this is on the British Council site where all the research reports are, and this is of course freely downloadable for everyone to read. So today I know I'm not going to be able to do justice to the whole project, so if anyone wants to know more, please go to this document. So the basic idea was in this project was that the children were allowed to make choices and decisions about their own learning. So the teachers went in and asked them about what they wanted to do. And they also provided quite a lot of useful feedback to the teachers about what happened to them and to their friends and to their little groups when they began to work on something in more or less an independent way. So some children chose stories they wanted to work with. Some children chose making puppets. There'll be lots of examples in a minute that I can show you. So this was a basic layer, I think. But what is important is that there was another layer to the activities, and that was exploring their own learning as co-researchers. So it wasn't just a learner-centered classroom where children get to choose things, because people always say to me, well, that's not research, that's just good teaching, that's just good learner-centered teaching. And of course, I agree with that. The first box here at the top, there's no research in there. But whatever they decided to do, they were then going to reflect on what happened, explore what they learned and how they learned it. So this is the group of children who were on my first slide. So they came every time also to our workshops, and they wanted to participate fully. So they made choices, they initiated activities, they suggested content, they attended conferences with us. And this last point, I guess, is the one that makes this research. they progressed bit by bit on the continuum of becoming researchers. So they were encouraged by their teachers to always look into what they were doing, why they were doing it, and how much learning happened. So, for example, some children, as I said, decided that they wanted to set their own holiday homework. This is a big thing in India. I never realized this before I went there, that children get a lot of homework for holidays. And many children, of course, don't do their homework in the holidays because it's boring and because it's the holidays. But interestingly, some children suggested that they would like to think of exciting things to do for the holidays. So they designed a whole set of tasks and activities for holiday homework. Children also proposed, for example, alternative textbook chapters and activities. So when the teacher first went in and said, we're doing this project, we can choose to do something exciting together, then some children wanted to do a more exciting book than what they were working with, because the books were pretty monotonous and the children didn't enjoy learning from them. So in the case of one teacher, this was developed so far that the textbook chapters were actually given over to another class to work with, because the children were so keen to see the chapters working and being made use of in other classrooms, not just their own. Very young children in one classroom proposed puppet making and performed a play and explored what they learned that way. And some children suggested writing magazines, and these magazines were based mainly on local news, and they interviewed people in their own community, for example, which was very interesting to see. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that in a minute. So let me just talk you through one particular example in more detail to make it, again, perhaps clearer where the research part comes in. So in this classroom, the children decided to create an English book corner. So the teacher brought in lots of books, parents, volunteers, lots of people helped to bring in books so that the children could work with books. And then they were choosing books to read on an individual basis and took some notes on the books, like what they enjoyed or what they didn't enjoy. But there was a very important step. If you didn't like the book, you were free to put it back. So some children took a while to choose. Some children chose something that perhaps wasn't their level and they had to put it back, or selected something that was boring and they wanted to put it back. But eventually everyone was happy and everyone was busy and engaged reading. So this very small idea of you're allowed to put it back if you don't like it, because there was a big selection of books, actually helped to ensure that everyone was on task and everyone was enjoying reading, because eventually what you choose, you're going to want to read. Then they volunteered telling stories in class, and the teacher told us that even the quietest children wanted to do this, because it's a bit of peer pressure. If the others do it, then sort of even though you might be a quiet one, you might think to yourself, well, I can do that as well, why not? And then what I put here in blue is the research part. So then at the end, the children designed a questionnaire to explore what was learned in this project, and they reported the results. So here is the other publication for the British Council. This is Children and Teachers as Co-Researchers, a Handbook of Activities. So activities like this, like the one I've just talked you through, are available in this book. And you can, again, download this and you can adapt each and every activity according to possible use in any context, in any classroom. So the sections in this handbook are trying out something new, children making choices, handing over control, feedback and self and peer assessment. And then in green, I've got building positive relationships and social awareness. And in red, I've got something different. So again, the colors I've used have got a significance, because the first four would be very typical of a child-centered autonomous classroom. Yeah, so you're working in a particular context, and you allow the children maybe to make some choices and to take a bit of control. Fine. The research part, which doesn't happen in these classrooms, is the designing of the research tools and analyzing the data. And in some cases, in many cases, something that was done at the beginning, belongs to one of the first four headings. And then as a different layer, the same teacher did something else or initiated together with the children something else that meant that they were looking into the learning that happened prior to that. And the bit I've got here in green is interesting because this was completely surprising to us. There was a very, very strong emphasis in the project on positive relationships and social awareness. So this kind of happened spontaneously. All the teachers reported that their relationship with the children changed in this project, that they were much closer, that they were happier, that they were more, not at the same level, but they were more working in a true dialogic manner, where it's not just the teacher asking questions, it's not just the teacher that's positioned as the knower, but the teacher is also a learner, and the learner is also someone who can bring ideas and knowledge. And social awareness also emerged because as soon as the children were asked, what do you want to do? A lot of them wanted to do things that were meaningful to them personally, things that were meaningful to them in their community. So, for example, when they went out to interview others, they were doing things like interviewing rag pickers in the street. So this idea of trying to understand why those children are in the street, why those children are not at school, how fair is this? It's very unfair, it's very wrong. So some of the children went as far as they raised money for these rag picker children in the street to come to school, and they bought uniforms and they bought school equipment for them. So there was this amazing interest in real life issues that were very, very important to the children. And that actually completely just arose from the fact that they were allowed to interview someone of their own choice about a topic of their own choice. So before I finish and just very quickly move to the second project, which is much smaller, I wanted to ask you whether, what you might be guessing about what the teachers' final reflections were about this project. But let me just show you some of the quotations. So the teacher said, the children became more active and more confident. Their English language levels increased. They became a lot more responsible. They started to collaborate and negotiate with each other, which is quite unusual because children are generally quite competitive in these classrooms, as we observed. Relationships in the class changed, both between peers, but also teacher and student relationships. And of course, this social awareness increased that I already mentioned. And teachers felt that they became learners alongside their class. Some of them also reported that the children no longer wanted to take anything ready-made. So after the project finished, some of the teachers were saying, well, even if I wanted to go back to how my classroom was before this project, I couldn't, because the children would look at me and say, what has happened? You know, all that work we've put in and all those ideas we've had. So it is quite dangerous, because if it works, the children won't really let you go back to your old ways. Okay, so just very briefly, in a few minutes, let me just show you something about a much smaller project. So this was something I did with children who ended up doing their own research. So this was done in a local primary school just nearby. I had a group of 8 mixed ability children who were year 5, so 9 to 10. 4 boys, 4 girls, and 4 of them were EAL. EAL means that English wasn't their first language. Some of them were right at the beginning of their career of learning English, and some of them may have been in a UK school for a year or 2 years. This research club I organized was Friday afternoons, and I only managed 6 sessions because the school was really busy. So I had 1.5 hours every Friday afternoon for 6 weeks. And we were learning about questionnaires, designing, administering, and analyzing questionnaires. I had to focus on something because I knew that 6 sessions was not going to be enough for learning about various types of research. But if you look up books and you know, ideas, Google, for example, research with children, you will find that the whole range of different research approaches have been taught to children before. Okay, so in a nutshell, what did I do? Well, first I tried to inspire them with child research. So I showed them, for example, YouTube videos from that OU site, the Open University site. I also Googled this, and lots of interesting stuff came up with child researchers. So there was a bit of kind of getting them excited, showing them what is possible to do. I also taught a lot of serious research terminology, and I didn't know whether this would work, but the children really enjoyed it. I told them I teach similar things to my MA students, and this might be a little hard for you, but don't worry about it. If it's hard, you don't need to remember it. And of course, they remembered it all. That's all I needed to say, and they remembered it all. So I taught them things like what is a research question and what is research methodology, and lots of serious terminology. Of course, it was done through games, and we practiced, and there were opportunities for them to look at the Open University child research presentations and try to say, where is the research question, what kind of methodology is used. So we practiced it quite a bit. Then they experienced filling in a questionnaire, because I was very sure that some of them had never actually seen a questionnaire, let alone designed one. And then after that, they chose their research questions and they designed their own questionnaires. And then we analyzed the data, and they completed presentations. They filmed their final presentation or recorded it on an MP3 player. It was their choice. Oh yes, and it's very important to say, I told them that anyone who finishes their research, I will then put those up on my own website. So the idea that your final product will be visible and available for external audiences to see seemed to be a very, very attractive idea indeed. So this is the sort of questionnaire they filled in. You don't need to see this. The intention is not for you to read it, but just to have an idea. So this is one of my graduate students, Samana, who designed this questionnaire actually for a study for a different group of children. But for this purpose, I liked these children to practice with the questionnaire just to get familiar with what it is. So again, they all filled this in, and then we looked at the types of questions, and we were looking at, okay, so show me a Likert scale question, show me a yes and no question, show me somewhere where you know, it would be possible to add another answer and things like that. So we had a little go at analyzing this. This is somebody's research question, as you can see it on the screen. So they were also doing PowerPoint presentations about their research, which was developed over time. So this question here says, our question is about, do people in year 3 and 6 would rather play video games or real life games? We chose this question because games are it's not finished, but obviously these two kids who were doing this were very, very keen game players. So they chose to work on that, but everyone chose whatever they wanted to research. So typically this is the sort of questionnaire the children came up with. Mostly they did it in pairs. They arranged themselves in pairs. I didn't really have to get involved in that. They were very good at sorting that out themselves. This is the PowerPoint bar charts that you can use. The reason I showed them how to use this was because quite a lot of the Open University research, child research examples had these bar charts and some pie charts. And I thought, well, I'll just show it to them. And they absolutely loved this. I thought this would be both boring and quite laborious to do, but they all thought this looked so grown up and so professional. So they all wanted to do bar charts based on their research. And this is what the learners said. So the first thing one of them said was at the end, when I said, so did you expect it to be like this, your research? And she said, I expected for you to do it all. We tell you some ideas maybe, but you write it all. And I expected that it'd be all very complicated. That is what I thought. So this idea that everything, research belongs to the adults, and we didn't really understand what to expect, but if anything, I expected that you would do it all. Another one, at the beginning I thought I didn't like this because I'm not very good at English, but I made this questionnaire with a friend and it was, well, not hard at all, and I really liked it. We learned a lot of things like ethics, data collection, pie charts, research questions and questionnaires, and also interviews, which is what we're having now. Another one, we were very excited when we got them, as in the questionnaires back. So in some cases, I think, because this was for these children the very first time they would have done anything like this, I think there came a real understanding of what research was all about when the data arrived. When their little questionnaires came back with the responses, it really began to make sense, and they were very interested to see what the answers were, because they were authentic. They were real answers to questions that they dreamt up. And then they could count how many people said what, and they make a bar chart out of it, and they thought that was terribly exciting. And of course, technology, I don't have time today to talk about all the wonderful benefits of technology in this kind of work and elsewhere. But they all commented how much they enjoyed the computer work. And again, just notice the wording. The best thing was that you let us go on the computer and we could write our own questionnaire. So it's all about ownership. It's all about giving us a little bit of control to do what we're so capable of doing. Really enjoyed making the bar charts. So that was a big surprise to me. That feeling when finally you finish the bar chart and it comes up and there's a massive explosion, and that is the best. So there were lots of comments about these bar charts. And another one, we're very much proud, especially because we did it almost alone. I would like to do some more. And again, this is very, very typical. When children enjoy doing something, whether it's a story or a game or anything, the immediate reaction when it's finished is, can we do some more? And I think that was kind of the feeling I got from them, that they would be ready now to do something more, something similar, but perhaps at a slightly higher level, and perhaps, you know, understand something about research that will take you just that little bit further along the line, towards developing into a more sophisticated researcher. So one final comment, yes, I would like to do it again times 20 million. Okay, so that needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. But it does convey the excitement, and it does convey the positive attitude of these children. So my very last slide, and may I just say, I think I have got only 5 minutes and I cannot see any questions anywhere. So I don't know whether maybe Daniel could help me, or whether people could quickly type anything, because I don't have a lot more time. But I would like to respond to any comments or questions that anybody may have. So I just want to finish with this slide here, saying that if you're interested in working with children as co-researchers or researchers, think about whether it's possible in your context. I think it may be possible in a small way, perhaps, if not a big way. How can you start? Well, you can start with a very small project. Maybe you can take an idea from the handbook that I made reference to. There's lots and lots of ideas for various age groups there. But the basic thing is to share this thought with the children, that shall we do something together and then explore it together? What should we do? The most talented teachers actually in the Indian project actually managed to do this within the constraints of the curriculum, which was very impressive. So obviously they didn't open it up to let's do absolutely anything, whatever comes to mind, but they managed to open up this opportunity within a particular theme or unit of learning. And yes, I guess the idea that it's not possible perhaps to do this everywhere shouldn't put us off the main aim, which would be to try and go along and see how far we can go. So the fact that we can't completely give up control, it shouldn't put us off. We should still try and push boundaries and find out how far we can go with these ideas. Okay, so this is all I wanted to say. I haven't got a lot of time left, according to the clock on my screen, but I'm still not seeing any of the questions. So I'm wondering whether I should be clicking somewhere maybe on my screen.
I'm not seeing any questions either.
So there are no questions.
I'm not seeing any, no.
Okay, all right. Well, if there are no questions, then I would just like to thank everybody for their kind participation and for giving up a whole hour of the Saturday afternoon. And as always, I find this a very inspiring topic, so I enjoy talking about it. Do get in touch with me by email if you want to. Here's my email address, but you can also easily just find it on Google. Look for me at Warwick University. Just like to quickly acknowledge, of course, all the teachers and the children that participated in my project, Rama Matthew and Samana and Richard Smith, and many of the other colleagues who've inspired me along the way. But this is my email address. So if you do have a question, but you didn't want to ask it here, please get in touch. I will check this email every day and I will get back to you. So thank you very much. And thank you to Daniel as well for helping me with today.
Thank you so much, Annamaria. I mean, that was a fascinating webinar, especially I found particularly interesting what your projects and what you did with children and how you provided them with agency in order to be able to actually do research. I find that really interesting. I'm sure that all the people who attended this webinar have been inspired by what you've said and the work that you've done in countries like India and other places. And I'd really like to thank you on behalf of the ReSIG and the Young Learners and Teenagers SIG, because this was a joint collaboration between the two SIGs. So thank you so much, Annamaria.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you again to everyone who came along. Thanks very much, Daniel.
Our next webinar will also be jointly organized with the Young Learners and Teenagers SIG. We'll have Sandy Murao talking about research in the primary English classroom, collecting informed consent from children. This will take place on the 26th of November at 4 p.m. CET. So I do encourage you to join us, and it will be another interesting webinar. Following that, we'll have a webinar led by Scott Thornbury on the 16th of December, but we'll be posting details on the ReSIG Facebook page and on the IATEFL Facebook page as well. Thank you so much to everyone for attending, and I hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you.